Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Donna Martinez. Welcome once again to Shaftesbury Society here from the John Locke Foundation, coming to you live from Midtown Raleigh. Well, if it's the middle of April, you know what that means, right? Tax time is upon us, and every year, we think about the same things. We try to get the documents, the receipts together. We try to figure out, are we going to do this ourselves? Are we going to hire someone else to do this? And the realization comes to us of just how much of our hard-earned money is really being given over to federal, state, and local governments. But just as important as understanding where you are right now with your tax situation, it's really important to understand where we could be heading when it comes to federal taxes and state taxes as well. That's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. The differing views of, for example, the Biden administration and the Cooper administration versus the legislative leadership in the North Carolina General Assembly. We've got a lot to talk about and some really great, knowledgeable panelists with us today. First of all, joining us is State Senator Paul Newton. He is the Senate Finance Chairman in the North Carolina Senate. Also, State Representative John Soka. He is a senior chairman of the House Finance Committee. Greg Thompson is the North Carolina State Director of the NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business. Jared Walczak is Vice President of State Projects with the Tax Foundation. He's going to bring the national perspective to us today. And then my colleague here at the John Locke Foundation, certainly last but not least, that is Brian Balfour. He is the Senior Vice President of Research here at Locke. Folks, welcome. Really appreciate you joining us today. Representative Soka, let's start with you. I know that you've been in the legislature for a number of years. Protecting taxpayers, limiting government has really been a priority of yours in the legislature for many years. Give us a sense of what your viewpoint is and what you've seen over the last few years.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me today, and thanks for your kind introduction. Um, One of the things that drove me to run for election was I owned a small business, and it was I'd make the payments, made payroll, and turn around at the end of the month and look to see what was left, and it was all going to taxes, and I thought it was just wrong. So that was one of my motivations to come up with, and why I got involved early on in tax reform back in 2013. Um, Conservatives generally think that what we need to do is make the tax policy more fair, treat all taxpayers similarly, and to go for lower rates because business likes it. People like it when you can keep more of what you actually earn. And what we did initially in 2013 with the comprehensive tax reform was to take out of a lot of inequities. And I could go on for days talking about all the special sweetheart set asides that were in there for individuals and for corporations. We cut all that stuff out, flattened the rate, and all of a sudden, a lot of folks were happy. It seemed to be well received in the business community. So I moved on from that. And with the premise of, if you're going to cut the rates, you need to expand the base somehow because the state still needs enough money to operate. So transforming our tax policy, not only from what it was in the past, it was based on an industrial model. And everybody knows that now we're more service-based going into the future and online-based. So in 2015, in that year's budget, we expanded sales tax base into services. We looked at services across the country and really focused on the ones in our region where we were out of step with neighboring states. We expanded that. That took about 2 years to fully implement and work out some of the kinks in that. And that did expand the base, and that allowed us to lower the rates one more time. Then in 2018, the Wayfair decision came along, and the Wayfair decision was a U.S. Supreme Court decision that said you could tax businesses that were selling into your state if they did not have a physical presence in the state. That was a major Supreme Court decision. Again, we adjusted state law, state tax policy to adjust to that. And then in 2019, there were still some marketplace facilitators. Think companies like Amazon. They sell their own products, but they also facilitate other companies. We expanded the law to encompass that. So it really made it an even playing field between our own in-state businesses and out-of-state businesses. Every one of those was a major decision in tax policy that did expand the base, increased revenue, and allowed us to lower the rates, which we've continued to do. And this year we're looking at lowering the rates again as a result of expanding marketplace facilitators. So we have been true, I believe, to expand the base, lower the rate, squeeze out the inequities in the system, and it's resulted in a better environment, not only for individuals, but certainly for businesses.
And Senator Newton, at the end of the day, after all of this that has been taking place through legislative leadership over the years, people are keeping more of what they earn, which is a positive thing for everyone. But Senator Newton, you are looking even further right now in this session because you really want to keep this momentum going of not only with tax reform, but keeping that spending in check, limiting spending to core services. And you've got a proposal that is underway right now. Tell us about that for this Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
Sure. As you noted, it is called a Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It's Senate Bill 717. And what it really recognizes is the good work over the last decade in making what I would call structural tax reforms. So if you think about an analogy between a one-time incentive a business might get for locating in North Carolina, what's much more important than that one-time incentive is the structural foundation we have here in North Carolina. Companies are not coming here for a day, week, month, or year. They're making 50-year bets on our state. And so I think by the good work that was done before I got to the Senate and that I've tried to carry on, the more structural, the more sticky, if you will, we can make these tax changes, the more confidence job creators can have in choosing our state over other states. And so the Taxpayer Bill of Rights would follow in those footsteps because it would involve a constitutional amendment. And there's nothing much stickier than having it in your Constitution. And what it would do, it would limit the growth of government to the growth of population and inflation. It would also sort of prescribe proper uses for at least some of the funds, which would be like the rainy day fund, if you will, to make sure we're ready for the next rainy day. It would also require future tax increases to go to a local vote. So that is probably perhaps the most constraining part of this constitutional amendment, is that taxpayers would actually get to vote on the issue of whether they should have their taxes raised. So let's see, in addition to that, I might point out that not only would the savings reserve be a target for funds that are over and above what the base budget needs, but also unfunded liabilities. And as you know, states like Chicago, New York are really being crippled by unfunded liabilities. We have some here in North Carolina. It's certainly not crippling, but we've got to continue to keep those in focus to make sure we have sound fiscal health so that we don't have to raise taxes for something that we know is coming someday, but it's just not here today.
Greg Thompson, what does all of what you're hearing mean to you and your members? Some of the members of NFIB are people who actually file their business income on their personal returns, so they're affected by what happens with the personal tax rate. Other businesses are corporations. What do you make of what has happened through the General Assembly and the Republican legislative leadership over the years, and what Senator Newton's proposal is today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Donna, for having me on here. And I would like to publicly thank Representative Zoka and Senator Newton for their leadership in the tax changes and over the past few years. I can only speak for small independent businesses, and the changes that have occurred, tax changes that have occurred over the past 10 years, has definitely been positive and helped the business sector and our members as independent business owners. As far as we've had one little issue with broaden the base with service taxation, taxes on services, and that's just have a fair playing field. Everybody, whether it's professional services or whatever services, we follow and monitor, and would like to make sure that it's a fair way of broadening that base, because we understand that it's moving, that we are certainly moving to a service state and tourism and so forth. Small business owners have had, of course, with the last year, have been hit the hardest with the pandemic, and the taxes that they have been able to generate through the last year has helped generate the surplus that the legislature will be dealing with this year. But let me touch on Senator Newton's. I remember I took office in the House in 1992, and in 94, the Republicans also had a taxpayer bill of rights, and I commend you and the leadership for taking this on now, and think that it is a positive step forward in assuring that North Carolina has a very strong tax policy that's going to recruit new business and help the businesses that are in our state now. The biggest problem we have, as we read every day, is having people for jobs. As far as our small businesses, there are jobs everywhere, and companies are, you read every day, companies are announcing they're coming into the state and how many jobs are being created. The biggest problem right now is getting people to work. So, we've got to do something about that.
Yeah, think about where we were 1 year ago, and the reverse was true. So it's incredible, the journey that we have taken over the past year or so. Jared, here in North Carolina, we like to think of ourselves, and actually the data backs it up, frankly, that the tax reform of the past 6-8 years or so has really been transformational for North Carolina. Help us understand how North Carolina compares to other states. We say we're a model, and we know that we've been reforming with a goal of trying to make sure that people keep more of what they earn. So how has this manifested itself in terms of how we compare?
Well, thank you. It's good to be able to be with you here today, at least remotely. So thanks for the invitation and for that question. I think a couple of things first worth mentioning. I'm from Virginia. I worked in the Virginia State Senate for a number of years, and the anecdotal answer to this is the grumbling of Virginia state legislators about how all of the jobs are moving over to North Carolina because they have a better tax code. Maybe some better ways to look at this beyond that. So
we like grumbling, though. We're good with that.
Absolutely. We have something called the State Business Tax Climate Index. We look at over 120 different variables on how states structure their tax codes. This is not the how much, it's the how. It's how you raise the dollars. And North Carolina is one of only 3 states with all of the major taxes that consistently rate in the top 10 or 12 among states, because it's kind of easy to be high on one of these indices if you're, say, Wyoming, and you get all of your revenue from oil, and therefore you can forego an individual income tax, you can forego a corporate income tax, and therefore there's nothing wrong structurally with the corporate income tax you don't have. But most states can't do that. And the states I continually point to are going to be North Carolina, Indiana, and Utah, 3 states that have found ways with much more typical economies to structure in a way that is neutral, that is competitive, that's pro-growth. And I want to hit a little on that neutrality, because obviously part of what you did was reduce overall tax liability, and that's really important. But a significant issue is creating that more level playing field, because policymakers in North Carolina and elsewhere are very smart. I think we have some very smart people on this call, but the smartest thing that a lawmaker can probably do is recognize that they are not going to be able to anticipate everything the economy is going to do, where investment needs to flow, what sectors are going to grow. You do not want lawmakers or regulators or anyone else making the decisions of how investment takes place. And tax codes implicitly do this. They pick winners and losers because the different ways that we structure taxes tend to fall more heavily on certain businesses, or because we interfere directly with targeted incentives. And what we've seen in North Carolina and a handful of other states in recent years is going to much greater neutrality, trying to use the tax code just to raise revenue because that's its purpose and not to decide how people should invest, where jobs should be located, all of those other things. And that unleashes the economy, that allows more growth. And I think we've certainly seen that in North Carolina. It's become a much better place to work. We've seen more job creation because of this. We've seen an overall more competitive tax environment. And this is a modernization that was long overdue. You're not in any way alone in this, but you had a tax code that in some ways can be characterized by high rates with a lot of carve outs for selected industries, particularly textiles and agriculture, and in some ways just classes within textiles and agriculture. And once that's not really your future, even though those are important parts of the economy, it becomes a problem that you are discriminating against everything else. And I think North Carolina has done a great job of unleashing some of the growth in other sectors.
You know, that's a great way to conclude your thought, unleashing other sectors, because really that's what we here at the Locke Foundation really would like to see. You know, public policies, whether it's tax reform or other areas that really do unleash economic activity and people's ability to reach out and follow their dreams and do whatever they would like to do. You know, Brian, one of the things that you have done as you have been assessing where North Carolina's tax reform and tax policy has been in the past and where it could be headed via Senator Newton's bill. Tell us what the impact would have been. What would North Carolina have looked like, Brian, had this spending restraint idea that Senator Newton is talking about been in place previously?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. And I would say a big argument for a taxpayer bill of rights is that it would really enshrine in the Constitution and make permanent the fiscally conservative budget restraint that we've seen over the last decade here in North Carolina. And we're just one election away from going back to reckless spend and tax policies under liberal leadership. And to your point, Donna, take, for example, the years leading up to the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, kind of looking at the numbers during the boom years for the 8 years leading up to that recession, North Carolina state budget increased by a whopping 49%. So of course, then what happens when the recession hits, the revenues start to take a significant fall, is that those spending commitments become completely unsustainable. And what happened then is that legislators are confronted by massive budget shortfalls. Panic mode sets in, and what did they do in 2008, 2009? They passed arguably the biggest tax hike in North Carolina state history, which came with a price tag of about $1 billion. So I kind of, what I did is went back and kind of ran the numbers and said, well, what if instead we had a taxpayer bill of rights implemented, say, 5 years before the Great Recession? What would that have looked like? And what would have happened is that it would have restrained annual spending increases during those years prior to about maybe 4 or 5%, really smoothed it out rather than the big 8, 9% annual increases we saw. And so what would have happened is that by 2008, the budget would have been limited to nearly $2 billion less than what was actually scheduled for that year when the recession hit. So in actuality, even after revenues took a hit, basically a nosedive, as the onset of the Great Recession, even that diminished amount of revenue still would have been enough to cover the state budget in that year. The state would have not confronted any budget shortfall at all. In fact, it still would have maintained a surplus. Also, during those intervening years, during those handful of years leading up to the recession, there would have been, I think it was about $5 billion in surplus revenues that would have been a combined return to taxpayers and set aside in a rainy day fund. So really, once again, if North Carolina would have had this taxpayer bill of rights just for a handful of years before the Great Recession, North Carolina still would have had a very sound budget situation, would not have been confronted with significant shortfalls, would have had plenty of rainy day funds to cover any shortfalls that happened in 2009, possibly 2010, would have avoided a major tax increase, would have avoided thousands of state employees, including teachers, being laid off. So, I really like to try to emphasize the important part of a taxpayer's bill of rights is not after things are going south with the economy, but it restrains the spending commitments and the buildup of the state budget during the good times, so that when recession period does come, we're not faced with these massive shortfalls and confronted with decisions like billion-dollar tax hikes.
So choices have consequences, and policy choices made one year will have consequences potentially 5, 6, 8, 10 years down the road. You know, Senator Newton and Representative Soka, it's no secret, and Carolina Journal has been reporting on this, that Governor Cooper has a very different approach to how he wants to spend and tax from your approach of being much more restrained. So what does that mean? Tell us about the tug of war, and what are the choices that we're facing here?
Well, John, I'll start real quickly,
Okay.
and I'll pass to you. I mean, what it illustrates in my mind is a disconnect between the public purse and the private purse. When you're a steward of your own finances, you don't go on reckless spending binges. You do not borrow more than you can afford. But for some reason, when it becomes public money, taxpayer money, it becomes an expedient, politically expedient thing to do, to spend all that money to make your targeted recipients of those dollars feel good today, and hopefully through the next election cycle. And it's very reckless. I mean, look at what's happening at the federal level right now. It's as though it will never have to be repaid, and that's only because it's public dollars. So I think that shame on the political class for disconnecting reality from the taxpayers' wallets. And so at some point, maybe many years from now, but that is going to have adverse repercussions nationally. Well, we can avoid those in our state, as Brian just described from 2008. Here we are. We're in great shape coming through the pandemic, and we want to be in great shape the next time the cycle changes on us. And I just want to applaud the point about not being able to anticipate what job growth sector is going to be strong in the coming years. When we think we know, we used to think we knew it was textiles, right, in North Carolina. How wrong we were. And so that broad-based tax relief is something that invites all job creators to come to North Carolina, and in Greg's case, to stay in North Carolina.
And I'd agree with everything Senator Newton just said. Let me just add a couple of points of my own. And that is that there's a basic fundamental difference in how the two sides look at the world. And I'm not talking about the House and the Senate, because Senator Newton and we disagree on some things, but most of the time we're dead on. You have to be able to say no. It's just like when you have children. If you've ever had a kid and you got a 4-year-old, you have to tell them no sometimes. They whine and they cry and they stamp their feet and hold their breath till they turn blue. But in the long run, it's better for them that they're not touching the hot stove, or they're not staying up till 3 a.m. or whatever. With Governor Cooper on the other side, the one phrase that I've heard repeated over and over and over the whole time I've been here is like, well, that's a good start, but it's just not enough. And you know what? It's never enough. They have a philosophy that you can never spend enough money. And, the case in point, look at what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. A couple trillion here, a couple trillion there. I mean, I used to think $1 billion was a big number. I think $1 billion is a big number, but now they're spending trillions and trillions of dollars that have to be paid back. And still, the other side says, well, we need more, we need more, we need more. So our side of the aisle, we're frequently looked at as probably brothers and uncles of Scrooge McDuck, sitting around there just being Scrooges about it. But we're the responsible ones. You have to budget responsibly. You have to spend responsibly, because a lot of times it is enough. And that's the basic difference in philosophy that I've seen, that it's like responsible spending and tax policy versus it's never enough, which takes you down the road of irresponsible behaviors and irresponsible policies, which we've cleaned up over the last several years.
And Ken is writing this in the comments section of the Locke Foundation's Facebook page. Will we have another deadlock over the budget? Interesting question. You've got two opposing points of view, and you've got folks who are trying to come together. So what does the future hold for the budget, and also what does the future hold for the Taxpayer Bill of Rights?
Let me jump on this one first, Paul, if I may.
Mhm.
First off, you have to understand that the last budget was vetoed by the governor. We did not override it. And then the legislature passed a series of mini budgets because government has to function and it had to be paid for. So the whole series of mini budgets that we passed and went into law encompassed about 93% of what the original budget that the House and Senate had approved and sent to the governor, which was vetoed, that it had. So what happened was that the governor ended up having to fund the government. What he really hurt, and the groups he really hurt, were teachers on just refusing to cooperate and come to an agreement on teacher pay raise, and some of the other things he was stuck on that the legislature is just not going to do. In this last election, the House members went on the Republican side from 65 members to 69. Veto override is 72. In the Senate, they went from 29 to 28, and they need 30 to override. So politically, my assessment of the climate is that the legislature is in a stronger position this time going into negotiations. And to give credit where credit is due, I believe that some of the things that Governor Cooper has said have indicated a willingness on his part to negotiate more with us this time so that we don't have a repeat of last year. We just need to really get the budget passed and signed. I've seen indications from the governor's office that he's willing to move towards that end, and I certainly hope that's what we see.
So I think that's a great answer. The only thing I would add is that I think North Carolina is in a unique position to create a bit of a flywheel effect to further separate itself from other states around the country that are headed toward higher and higher taxes. So the federal government is borrowing everything it can borrow, and here we are. We don't have to borrow a dime more. So I think that if I'm a business looking to make $1 billion investment in one of the United States of America, I'm going to look hard at North Carolina, because in spite of all the sort of the chaos in other parts of the country, we are sticking to our fiscal responsibility guns, and we are creating a place where that they can safely come and make those 50-year plus investments. So I think that we have a potential for a bit of a flywheel effect if we stay the course and continue to be strong on our fiscal policy here in the state and receptive. And of course, it's a life cycle state, right? We can't stop with taxes. And this is the other important point. There's never a finish line. I mean, I have heard some say, well, yeah, we're rated very, very highly. We're Forbes #1 place in the country in which to do business, so we're good. We're never good. You know, the goalpost is always moving. The state of Virginia, if we sit still 2.5 years from now, will be ahead of us on those ratings potentially. Other states are moving forward and being as competitive as they can be. So we're never finished with this, and there is no finish line. So I think we need to keep pushing forward and expanding the sort of tax reductions and the sort of environment that people want to come to, whether you're an individual in a family or whether you're a job creator or whether you're already here, as in Greg's case. We need this to be the place you stay.
You know, Senator, it's interesting with your Taxpayer Bill of Rights, of course, you know, you're looking to the future, you're wanting to be able to fund core services, but help people be able to keep as much as possible of what they earn, attract those businesses and talent who want to come in to North Carolina. The pushback, of course, that you hear, the big media narrative is, hey, particularly now since there's been all this federal relief money coming into the state, that North Carolina has lots and lots of money, and this is the time to go ahead and spend, or what some of the folks on the left will say, invest. What do you say to folks who say, we've got lots of money, time to spend it?
Yeah. Well, I do like the way we addressed that earlier, but I would also say that um, that's the easy path forward. Fiscal responsibility is the harder path, and the fact that as we sit here today, I would put a very small percentage chance that the Tabor bill will actually pass both chambers and make it into law. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Even though the odds seem stacked against us, we still need to keep telling the story about how much better off we'll be as a state if we restrain government spending and treat the taxpayers the same way we tend to treat ourselves with our own wallets. And if we have 6 of the last 7 years, we've taken more revenue in than we needed. 6 of the last 7 years. So what the Tabor would do, would it be to ensure that once we use dollars for necessary government spending, those dollars can actually be returned where they belong, which is to the taxpayer. Nothing more stimulative to the economy than a taxpayer that never has to put a dollar into the government mill. I mean, you've got the federal government giving out stimulus payments, but think about that. It's got to go through the entire tax system. And you talk about the waste heat on that $1 bill. By the time it's returned to the taxpayer as a stimulus payment, I don't know how much of the value in that dollar has been lost, but a great deal through the bureaucracy of government. So let's just let that taxpayer keep the dollar in the first place and spend it on whatever they want to spend it on, not what government wants to spend it on.
Jared, this federal money that has been flowing into states has just been building up that the debt to just astronomical heights. And to Senator Newton's point from a few minutes ago, it's as if some people think it's not going to have to be paid back. So we are really facing a reckoning in terms of federal spending. Jared, I thought it was interesting just days ago that you were quoted in a Wall Street Journal story. The headline on the story, states were told they can't use U.S. COVID-19 aid to cut taxes, and they sued. Jared, give us the kind of the landscape of what's happening in terms of this federal money and how states are going to be impacted by this.
Yeah, there's $350 billion for state and local governments in the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA. About $200 billion of that goes to states. And there are some restrictions on this in two different directions. One, there is a list of 4 things that states are allowed to do with the money. And theoretically, if it's not on that list, you can't do it. And then 2, there are 2 direct prohibitions that even if you can find a way to shoehorn it into one of those categories, it cannot be used to offset a net tax reduction, and it cannot be used to deposit into pension funds. And the limitation on tax reductions is causing a lot of heartburn and consternation in the states, honestly, red and blue states alike, because it is so vague and so broad, because it covers both direct and indirect offsets. So it's one thing for the federal government to say, here's some money, here's how we'd like you to use it, and you can't just cut taxes with it. You can't just, do a 1-year tax cut. That's within the federal government's power, whether you'd like to do it or not. It is within the federal government's power to put that sort of strings on money it provides. It's the indirect offset where this gets really complex and I think extremely vague and disconcerting to states, because what if you have revenue surpluses, your revenue is growing, you want to cut taxes, you're getting this money to do certain things, and theoretically you can use it to reduce some of your own outlays because it covers some things you already plan to do. Therefore, it frees up money, and therefore theoretically it's indirectly offsetting a net tax reduction, even if you were able to make that tax reduction already. This creates some very serious issues. Not only does it create uncertainty about everything from, tax conformity with the Internal Revenue Code to EITCs and, standard deduction changes and pretty much everything that states do on a regular basis. But also, obviously, states that do want to reduce taxes now have to be concerned, do it to pay something back. 2 quick things I'll mention on that. One, most of the things you're allowed to spend this money on would not be an offset to tax cuts, even in the most extreme interpretation, because outside of offsetting your actual revenue losses, if you have them, there's not a lot you can do that really touches the general fund budget. It's special projects related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's not an offset. And 2, Treasury guidance hasn't come out yet, but they have a strong incentive to make this very narrow guidance, because if they don't, the litigation, I think, has a very high chance of success. There are a couple of things that you can't do at the federal level when it comes with state funding. One, you can't be unduly coercive. You can attach some strings, but if functionally states can't say no, that's unconstitutional. Two, you can't be vague. If you are going to require states to take a certain action as a condition of receiving funding or not having it recouped, states need to be able to anticipate whether an action would or would not accomplish that purpose. And right now we have no idea. Guidance may not even be able to clear that up if the statute itself is unclear. So we're going to clearly see, we have 4 different cases filed on this. We will see where they go. Hopefully the guidance itself will be very narrow. I think that the message right now is that states do likely have significant authority to handle their own fiscal affairs without worrying about recoupment. Very little of the money you're receiving could even be theoretically subject to recoupment, but still this is a troublesome federal policy. We really don't want the federal government getting into the business of deciding what state policies can be pursued as a condition of receiving relatively unrelated federal funding. You can see that used on either side of the aisle, and we just don't really want that sort of entanglement in fiscal policy. So hopefully we'll get some clarification soon, and it'll be very narrow in how it's applied or construed.
Brian, it's a situation where it almost makes my hair hurt just to listen to Jared's description here, because it just seems that there's so much entanglement between federal policy and rules and funding with state policy and state rules, and that there's really not much of a way to disentangle a state from the feds.
Yeah, and oftentimes state legislators will look at federal dollars flowing into the state as quote unquote free money, and just fight each other to spend it faster than the next. But really, typically federal dollars are not free. As Jared was talking about, that they typically come with strings attached, and those strings can be both financially in terms of requiring state and local matches, but also come with strings attached that sacrifice state sovereignty. I mean, in this case, it potentially could eliminate states from lowering their taxes, changing their very tax code. I mean, what an incredible encroachment that would be on the ability of states to govern themselves, when accepting that money dictates to your state legislators the very tax policy from which they generate revenues to run their state. So, I think we need to be very cautious as a state when we are evaluating whether or not to accept federal funds, because there are those many different types of strings attached.
Representative Soka and Senator Newton, do you see this issue of the federal funding and those dictates about what you can and can't do impacting in a negative way what those of you in legislative leadership would like to do in terms of tax policy and spending policy here in North Carolina?
So I'll start, Representative Soka, on this one. I'm ready for that fight. I mean, Representative Soka will tell you, well, number one, it's patently unconstitutional for the federal government to do that. Number two, I have clear and convincing evidence that we were considering tax reductions well before ARP came onto the scene. And in fact, I think the finance chairs had talked about it together before. In fact, I'm sure we did before ARP. So while we want to be wise, we want to read the guidance and understand what constraints the federal government thinks it can place on us, and to the extent we can navigate around those, that's just smart to do. But I'm ready for that battle anytime they want to bring that battle, because we had excess revenues in North Carolina on a standalone basis, and we had headroom to make significant tax reductions for North Carolinians before ARP was ever passed at the federal level.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Senator Newton wholeheartedly on that. Uncertainty is the bane of the existence of any legislature or any business for that matter. Certainty in business is always better than uncertainty, whether the business is government or whether the business is your own business. To say that we're going to give you X billion of dollars and we're going to publish guidance at some point in the future, that's a little irresponsible, in my opinion, to say the least. If you're going to have guidance, now I understand the rulemaking procedures and I get all that takes time and all that, but we're dealing with major decisions that have major tax implications for businesses and individuals. And I think it's not really good that the federal government said, here's a bunch of money and just hold on to it. We're going to give you some rules down the road, but oh, by the way, you can't do this or you can't do that. It's not really responsible government. I think that there are several things that the federal government has told us recently that we might be able to use the ARP funds for. They're saying, you know, our interpretation of what we did last March or February, whenever they passed on the CARES Act, was this, and then we as a state go forward, and in December they change it, putting us in a huge fiscal problem if we decide to do it. And then they say, we're going to give you money, but you can't use it for that. I mean, there's so many inconsistencies. What I think is going to happen is that the first state to move forward that actually allocates or appropriates some of the ARP money to pay for some of the things that they're mandating or that they imply mandate that they want states to do, that'll be the test case. And in that case, if we're the lead on that, we might be better off because we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic attorney general. If they're on board with us in the legislature on some of those things, we might very well set the precedent for the rest of the country. I don't know. I would just encourage anybody who's on this call that works for the U.S. Department of Treasury to hurry up and give more complete guidance than the scattered, incomplete guidance they've issued so far.
Could I jump in here one more time briefly?
Please.
Because North Carolina is set to get what, $5.3 billion at the state level, and then of course local spending it all as well. The biggest challenge, I think, is going to be figuring out what in the world you can spend that on. Because there's only 4 buckets of things you're allowed to spend it on under the legislation. One, you can cover revenue losses. You don't have a net revenue loss the way that it would be likely to find. So there's not that to cover. 2, you can do programming that is designed to cover the economic and public health effects of the pandemic. This is very similar to that $150 billion under the Coronavirus Relief Fund and the CARES Act. Most states struggle to spend all of that. They've had to get delayed deadlines so that, extending it so that they can spend all of it. So it's unclear. There's probably something more there, but you've already done a lot of that. And there's also this direct aid for a lot of the pandemic responses like vaccinations and everything. So that's not a need. So there's a question of how much you can actually do there. You're also allowed to do enhanced salary and pay for essential workers. I'm not sure if any states are going to jump on that. This is a kind of unusual thing, but it's out there. And then there's this very narrow infrastructure piece where you're allowed to cover water, sewer, and broadband. And broadband is also, there's $100 billion for broadband in the proposed American Jobs Plan Act. So who knows if states want to jump on that one. There's maybe this whole pot of money coming their way later just for that. So states are going to do some water and sewer projects. They're going to do a handful of responses. But when you have $5.3 billion, you may really struggle. So you're going to think about, well, can we deposit this into a rainy day fund? Probably not. Can we put it into the unemployment compensation trust fund? Hopefully so, but probably not. What you can do, I think, is pay out current claims. That is at least something that you can continue to do like you're allowed to do under the CARES Act. But there's all these limitations. But the reason I list all of these as well is not just to say it's going to be tough to spend them, but most of those things that you can do don't touch your general fund. These are things that are direct responses to the pandemic, and therefore they're not an offset of a net tax reduction. In fact, just about the only thing I could think of that you're legally allowed to do with the funding that might be a net offset would be you're allowed to pay the salaries of existing public health and public safety employees out of the funding. You're able to do it with the CARES Act as well. And that does reduce your general fund outlays and therefore could be seen as freeing up some money. But everything else, you could spend billions of dollars and there's nothing that offsets. And it's important also to tell you that if there was recoupment, if the federal government disagreed with you on something and you lost, they only recoup the portion that was associated with a net tax reduction. It's not like you lose your $5.3 billion. So almost everything you can spend this on is just completely outside of that. I think there's clearly going to be fights. There's going to be debates about all of this. And I think the states are very strongly positioned in those fights. But the very first important thing to recognize is that very little of this funding is implicated by it. And your biggest challenge is going to be figuring out how to spend it.
Don, I might jump in on a couple of things.
Please.
I want to say that, one of the things that is concerning to most everybody is what's going on in Washington with the spending spree. I think we're looking at hitting a $30 trillion deficit, but no one is talking about how or when or if that's going to be paid back. I mean, it's neither party. I mean, it's very concerning that the national debt is growing that fast, and no one's talking about it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as far as North Carolina, I want to commend the past few legislatures and this one for being, as Senator Newton was talking about, not looking at year to year, looking at being proactive and looking down the road. And the Tabor bill certainly does that, because we have to, while we may have money, surplus this year, 2 years down the road, we may have the same amount in a deficit. So, I mean, being proactive in tax reform is crucial to the business community. As far as, I want to bring up something that's really time sensitive, that's going to play out this week in the legislature. And that's that we have a huge business coalition working on, and that's the deductibility of the PPP business expenses. The House passed it last week, 111-2. It's going to be voted on tomorrow, and then on to the Senate. This is, of course, where small business or businesses who received the PPP loans from the federal government will be able to, well, in North Carolina right now, cannot use the business expenses from that money to be deducted from their taxes. 46 other states have already conformed with the federal government. They are allowed to use that and deduct that on their federal taxes. In North Carolina, they cannot. And there's a bill in each chamber regarding this. May 15th is coming up. Our small business owners who sit at their kitchen table and do their taxes and write out their employee paychecks. One, they're not going to know what to do because it's going to be hard to find out, in a short period of time, which makes this very time sensitive. And secondly, it was the understanding that when they applied for these PPP loans, that the loan would be forgiven totally, and they were able to keep employees on the payroll and keep their lights and utilities on during the pandemic, and that helped generate some of the surplus that the state is now seeing. So this, it may not be, but $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 to these small businesses to be able to deduct that from their state taxes, but that's a lot of money to these small business owners who have suffered the most. And yes, we are in a recovery from the pandemic, but it's the independent business owners and restaurant and hotels that are recovering the slowest. So that's one issue this week that's going to play out, that the business community, I think both large and small, are watching very closely.
And I know last week when I was listening to some of those business owners who were part of a news conference that the House held, several of them said that the rules required them to spend the money within 8 weeks. And so the money was spent, they complied with the rules. And so I think at least one of the business owners said, so the money's gone, I don't have it to shoulder that tax burden. So that is going to be, I think, moving forward this week. Greg, one of the issues that we all know, and you've just kind of described it in terms of this particular situation, is uncertainty, and how that's the worst thing that a business has to confront. So you've got some issues here at the state level, but at the federal level, trying to figure out exactly what the Biden administration's tax plans are going to be. And it's not uncommon for a small business to have high enough revenues of potentially impacted by these tax hikes that President Biden is talking about. Talk a little bit about what your folks are potentially facing from the Biden administration.
A lot of people in general think that businesses, particularly and small businesses, have large revenues, and they don't. But if they do have a certain revenue level under the Biden administration, with his levels, the tax increases that he is proposing will have a huge impact on these small businesses. And when we talk about small business, the SBA has a definition of 500 employees or fewer. NFIB, we have 7,000 members in North Carolina, and we have sole proprietors to employers with 300 and 400 employees, but the average number of employees per member is 6. So we truly do represent those, those very small businesses. But everybody, we're all closely watching and monitoring what the Biden administration is going to do as far as what levels they're going to set for the way and the revenues that they're going to generate from increasing the taxes. And it's very concerning to see some of what's coming out of DC on of what the impact will be on the truly independent small business owners.
You know, Brian, there's a lot of research about the correlation between low taxes and low levels of regulation with economic growth. So you listen to Greg talk about what his members are facing, and it's two stories really for them. At the federal level, they're looking at these potential tax hikes, more rules, more government involvement. At least with the legislative leadership here in North Carolina, the conservative Republicans are trying to do the opposite, get government out of the way. But economic growth is so important, particularly coming out of a pandemic. Then you've got Greg saying, hey, our people need labor right now.
Yeah. And I think getting back to the point of a taxpayer bill of rights, we've seen how North Carolina, to your point, Donna, has really improved its business tax climate over the last decade, lowering taxes, in particular income taxes and on corporate taxes, and has dramatically improved our business tax climate. I think a decade ago, we were in the among the worst 10 ranked business tax climates according to the Tax Foundation. And now I think in 2021, we've climbed up to even in the top 10 now. And that's really been enabled by the restrained spending growth in the state budget, because they've been really responsible and maintaining the smoothed out pattern of spending rather than ratcheting it up when revenues are flowing in. That's really enabled us as a state to significantly improve our tax climate, which then of course is going to attract more business investment and job creation and really benefit, create more opportunities. And that's always going to be more beneficial to those on the margins of employment who are most in need of those opportunities. So it's really been a great boon to the state. So just kind of linking, that responsibility in terms of restraining spending growth and how it can enable better tax climates and therefore improve the state's economic condition and help out those in need.
Greg, what's the barrier to your folks finding the labor, finding the employees that they need?
What in the past few months is what has happened. Well, we all know the federal government in the CARES Act added to unemployment the $600 a week, and North Carolina has one of the lowest at $325, $350, I think. So I mean, there's no incentive if you're sitting at home making. If you're a service, a service worker or in tourism or whatever, sitting at home making more on unemployment because of that federal government bump, than to go back to work. I like what I'm hearing out of the legislature is requiring people that they have, in order to get their unemployment, they've got to go out and look for jobs or try to find. We used to have that. That was, I think, eliminated, but being looked at to require that people are out, if they're drawing on, they're out looking for a job. I mean, the job market is just, I mean, I can't explain how many people, how many members are calling and saying, we've got jobs, but we can't find people. We cannot fill them. And going to, big businesses that are moving into North Carolina, that concerns me, that what kind of message that sends. Also, I mean, not only for the small business, but for, the businesses that are announcing we're coming to North Carolina, Well, there's some apples and oranges there, but there's a lot of similarity there. If we've got to have a workforce that's willing to get out there and work.
Senator Newton, Representative Soka, what do you think about what you're hearing here? I mean, it's in some ways it's a quote good problem to have. We've got jobs now. We just need to match up the labor with the jobs that are now open. So we're starting to make our way out of this pandemic. We are in such a different place than we were 1 year ago. But now we have a different challenge, and that is trying to get people to get back into the workforce.
Well, I'll go first on this one, if that's okay, Paul. If you look at $600 a week and the average unemployment compensation, state unemployment compensation being paid is $228 a week. So you do the math on that for a 40-hour week, people are incentivized to stay home because they are earning the equivalent of $20.70 a week. A lot of people in the service industry don't make that much for various reasons. I mean, we all know that. So I look at this as when we're coming out of the Great Recession, North Carolina was one of the first states to end taking the federal supplement to unemployment at that time. And it raised a huge hue and outcry. But what happened was people went back to work. The worst thing that could happen, in my viewpoint, is for Washington, D.C. to extend yet one more time the extra $600 a week, because it actually incentivizes people to stay at home. People are not stupid. They can do math. If they're making less than $20.70 an hour at their regular job, why would they go back? I mean, it's kind of basic stuff. So the first thing is we need to make sure that our federal representatives and senators know that, and that they stop extending this out forever into the future. It seems to me like our new president wants the crisis to continue on forever because it's easier to do the things he wants to do. The crisis, and it has been a crisis, I will admit to that, but every crisis comes to an end. And we as a nation need to accept the fact that it's been a tough year. We need to get back to doing what Americans do best, which is innovate, have good jobs, move forward as a state, as a nation, and lead the world by example, not cower in our homes forever.
Couldn't agree more. And I know we're running out of time. I'll just put a punctuation point on that to say that but for those federal subsidies, North Carolina has the best unemployment program in the nation, and that is you can find a job. We want, private industry can move a family from low income to middle income. Government cannot do that. They cannot do it sustainably. And so while our colleagues on the other side of the aisle often criticize our unemployment insurance program as being not generous enough, the reality is we have jobs available for people to go to work. There's no better unemployment plan than that.
And Senator Newton, before we leave the issue today of restrained spending and tax reform, of course, you've got your Taxpayer Bill of Rights that you are championing in order to put us on a very good course, a stable course for the future. You tend to hear people say, well, when it comes to tax reform or reducing the level of taxation, that's just about helping the rich. But actually, in a lot of the tax reform that's taken place in North Carolina, because of the increase in that zero tax bracket, or the standard deduction, as it's technically known, really, it is people who are on the margins, the most vulnerable financially, that are benefiting the most from those reductions.
That's exactly right. We have, in fact, I have a bill pending on the Senate side, 337, which would give broad-based tax cuts, just as we're sort of extolling the virtues of. And one of the aspects of that bill would be to increase our standard deduction in North Carolina to match the federal standard deduction. And as you described, that means anyone within that standard deduction pays zero tax. And with regard to the PPP, I would just say we're all rowing in the same direction on that. The Senate is taking the time required to see if there's a better idea, because our concern is because we decoupled from that provision of the PPP from day one, but understand that there's the hardship. We want to help small business every way we can, The question in my mind that we need to explore a little further before we, pass a targeted tax relief on the PPP is we need to understand, number one, it could adversely impact broad-based tax relief, but more importantly, number two, we may be able to do it through a grant program. We may be able to use ARP money to accomplish the same result. Don't know the answer to that yet, but we're going to take a few days to make sure we know whether there's a better way than coupling with the federal tax code.
All sorts of moving parts here at the state level and at the federal level as well, all of them intertwined as well. State Senator Paul Newton, Representative John Zoka, Greg Thompson from the NFIB, Jared Walczak from the Tax Foundation, and my colleague here at the Locke Foundation, Brian Balfour. Gentlemen, thanks so much for giving us your perspective today. Really important discussion. Really do appreciate it. Thank you all. And folks, thank you for watching today. As always, we very much appreciate that you are interested, that you are engaged. You are the people who are leading the state, helping your friends, your family members to understand exactly why issues like this are so important. And that really does make us feel very heartened about the work that we do here at the Locke Foundation and the reporting that we do from Carolina Journal. I would ask you to consider this as we close today here at Shaftesbury Society. If you like what we're doing and you want to see more of it, we are a nonprofit organization, and we would ask you to consider making a tax-deductible donation to help fuel the work of the Locke Foundation. It's fast, it's simple, and it's secure. Just go to johnlocke.org. In the upper right-hand corner, there is a Donate tab. You can click that. Secure Portal is right there. It'll take you less than 2 minutes to make that leadership gift to help freedom be defended and advanced here in North Carolina. We would greatly appreciate your support. We want everybody to have a wonderful week, and join us again next Monday for another edition of Shaftesbury Society, where we're going to be talking about election integrity and voting law. You're going to want to be with us for that. Can't wait to share our panelists' views with you next Monday. On behalf of the entire John Locke Foundation and Carolina Journal team, I'm Donna Martinez. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next Monday.